We're now going to be creating some instance methods. So one way to think of classes is to think of them as blueprints. So these are the instructions for how the instance operates. And right now, our current car class has no useful instructions. So this blueprint, this class, whenever you define it, should list out all of the functionality that is possible with its instances. So right now, our car class was just defined, and then the pass keyword was used underneath. So it doesn't really have anything useful that it can do. Now, are the built-in types like integers, floats, they have many useful things. We can, multiply them. We do all these arithmetic operations, less than, test equality to. They do have some methods, strings, lists, tuples, dictionaries. They all have a lot of useful properties, and this is all outlined within their class definition. So we don't see that. That's just internally built by Python. So when we create our own classes, we have to think of them as, all right, what is the blueprint? What kind of functionality do we want our instances to have? So that's what we kind of want to think of. We can make an analogy to lawnmowers, right? So in the lawnmower factory, there's a blueprint for each lawnmower that tells you like the type of motor, what type of blade, the handle, the speed, and many other properties, many other types of functionality that these lawnmowers have. So these are just these instructions. Now, we have not given our car class any useful instructions. So that's what we're going to do now, is going to give it its first useful piece of functionality. And that is by defining a method. All right, so we're going to redefine our car class. And this time, instead of having the pass keyword, we're actually going to have a method here. So a method is just a function that is within a car class. So it's bound to this class, as we're going to see. And we're going to give it the functionality to drive. And we're just going to, it's going to look just like a function. Now, the first parameter for all methods is going to be self. I'm going to explain this later, but just ignore it for now. And then it's going to have one real main parameter that needs to be used whenever you call this method, and that's miles. So we're going to give it the ability to drive some number of miles. And so we're going to put a colon over here, press enter. It's going to drop us into the body of this method. And we're just going to have a print statement here. And we're going to say the car drove some number of miles. So we're just going to substitute in the word miles over here, and it will just print this out. Okay, so I'm going to execute this. So we've redefined our car class as this. So now it has one useful, instruction that it can do. Our car instances can now drive some number of miles. All right. So I just want to clarify the difference between a method and a function right here. So on the surface, they look exactly the same, but a method is bound to a class. So this is the key word over here, bound. They must appear in a class definition. So this is a method. It's underneath the class. Now, it is only available to car instances. If I try to call this, drive as a function and say I want to drive a car 10 miles, it's going to say it's not defined. There is no drive function. It has to be defined outside of a class for it to be available. So this is only available to car instances. So we have to create a car instance and then call that method with dot notation. Okay, so that's what we're going to do down here. And I'm going to explain what the self is here in a second. But first, I want to just go ahead and create this car instance. So I'm just going to do the same thing. My car equals car. So I've already redefined it. So it's going to use this new blueprint over here. And then I am now going to call, if I do dot and then tab, there's only one method, so it comes up immediately. But I'm going to drive the car now 10 miles. So this is how you access this function. It's a method because it's bound to a class. So we're going to call the drive method, and we have to pass it in the number of miles. Self gets automatically passed to it, so you don't have to worry about it. It looks like there's two arguments. There are technically two arguments here, but you only have to pass in one. Python will pass in self. Let's just go ahead and call this, and it's just going to run this code. The car drove 10 miles. So what is this parameter self doing here? So what happens is that Python implicitly, that means without like telling us, without us doing it. It's doing the work. That's what implicitly means, not explicitly. Like we don't have to write this down, but it'll pass the instance itself as the first argument to all methods. So it does that implicitly by default. So what this means is it's going to pass my car into it right there. So what's really happening, and this is not the correct way of doing that, is it's doing this for us. Now, if we try to run this, it's not going to work, but this is what Python is doing. Essentially, it's saying, all right, I'm going to pass it itself, but you don't have to actually write it here, or you actually can't write it here. And if I do this, it's going to say you've called it incorrectly. But that's essentially what is happening. It's passing the instance itself. So self refers to whatever instance is right here. Now, we don't actually use the instance anywhere in here. Some methods we will, but in this method we won't. So, but that's exactly what is happening over here. Now, you might think, all right, is self a reserved word? And is it have to be used? Can we use any other word here? Well, no, it is not a reserved word, but it is used by convention. It's possible to use any other name here as the parameter name, but you shouldn't. So you should always use self for this, instance that is being implicitly passed to all the methods. That's just by convention. That's what everybody else will use, and it'll just be very strange if you use any other variable name right there. Okay, so that's how you create methods. Again, it's just underneath the class. Within the class definition, you can create as many methods as you want, and as you'll see, we're going to create many more methods. And then to call the method, you have to create an instance and then use dot notation and call it, and you can have any number of parameters over here. There's always going to be one implicit parameter which you don't have to pass, but you do have to pass in arguments for all the other parameters. All right, so that's how instance methods work in Python.